super excited. We have Mark McClish. Now, this is awesome because a viewer on YouTube asked that I reach out to Mark because I had talked about statement analysis with Lena Cisco. I'm doing body language, and Mark is an amazing guy who, well, he was Secret Service Uniform Division at one point. Then he decided to move over to the U.S. Marshals because I guess he got bored. And while he was there, he decided, well, you know what? Let me become one of the preeminent experts on a field called statement analysis and even trademark the name. How are you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, what made you trademark the name out of curiosity?
Well, I started teaching what I called statement analysis in 1991 at the Marshals Service Training Academy. I was teaching interviewing techniques, which included statement analysis. Mm-hmm. And then by the time I taught for 9 years, when I left the academy around the year 2000 to come back out in the field, more officers some that I had trained, other people had trained in linguistic analysis, were retiring and starting to teach it. And I saw that some people called it forensic statement analysis. Some called it investigative statement analysis or linguistic statement analysis. So I thought, well, I need to trademark the name just statement analysis by itself, since it's starting to become a pretty popular field.
Okay, now, was this originally something that was taught by Avignon Sapir?
He was the first one, I would say, in the U.S. to teach a form of linguistic analysis to detect deception. He called it SCAN, Scientific Content Analysis. And a lot of the techniques are based on some of the SCAN techniques. I would say half of what I teach is what I discovered through my studies, and half is probably some of the same techniques that he uses as well as other people that teach any form of linguistic analysis.
Okay, now what I really like about it is, and you can correct me if I'm going down the wrong path, but I like the aspect that you can look at statements over time. You don't necessarily have to have the person there. You don't have to look at them, and your own opinions and things like that may color your judgments when you're looking at somebody, whereas you could take a transcript and have no idea who they are, what they look like, or anything else, and come up with some kind of conclusion. Would that be fair?
That'd be very fair. Yes. You don't need to see the person, hear the person, know anything about the person. Just give me a statement and you'll be able to tell if they're lying or telling the truth. Now, the more they talk, the longer the transcript is, the easier it is to determine if they're being deceptive. But yeah, we don't need to have any background information initially just to see what's going on.
Now, you can have fun with it too, right? I looked at all your stuff and I forgot to check, but things like Jack the Ripper. Have you ever done any of the Ripperology and looked at the Jack notes and determined, hey, is that really Jack? Is that a cop pretending to be Jack? Was the person even there? Is he playing a prank on the cops? Have you ever done any, had fun with that?
Years ago, somebody asked me, was doing a show on Jack the Ripper. I forget what it was. I think it was over in England. And asked me to take a look at some of the transcripts, but I don't recall exactly what conclusions we came to at the time. But yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm looking for cases in the news, high-profile cases that everybody's familiar with. Excuse me. And then from time to time, if things are kind of low, I may look for something that's happened in the past, if I can find some transcripts, just to analyze them and post them on my website.
Yeah, that would be so fascinating. I think about like letters that go back and forth between founding fathers, and I just feel like you could have kind of some fun with it all. Now, out of curiosity, would you say that the first case of statement analysis is in the Bible? I think I read that in your book.
Yeah, it has to do with King Solomon. And I think most people are familiar with the story. There were two women had small infant children, lived in their house, the same house together, slept in the same beds with their babies. And as the story goes, one of the mothers accidentally rolled on top of her child and suffocated to death. Woke up in the middle of the night, found her baby died. She then allegedly swapped babies with the other mother. Well, in the morning, the other mother woke up, had a dead baby, recognized it wasn't her kid, accused the other mother of swapping babies. She denied it. So they went before King Solomon. And what happened was one mother told her story, what had happened, and the other mother responded and said, no, the living one is my son, the dead one is yours. And the other mother quickly fired back and said, no, the dead one is yours, the living one is my son. And what I tell people is that we know that King Solomon brought out his sword, to determine who was lying and telling the truth. But he knew that before he ever brought out that sword, because he analyzed their statements, because the Bible tells us that he repeated their statements. He said, let's see, you say the living one is my son, the dead one is yours, and you say the dead one is yours, the living one is my son. And since he's the wisest man in the world, I got to believe what he was looking at was the order they mentioned the living one and dead one. The first mother, all she cared about was getting her son back, so she talked about the living one first, the dead one second. But the second mother was heavy on her heart is that her son passed away that night, so she talked about the dead one first, the living one second. And so order is important.
Yeah, that is something you definitely brought up. I think order, you've also brought up rules of three, if you will. Now, I want to touch on the rules of three, if possible, too, because linguistically, in writing, we tend to use rules of three, and in describing things, we tend to use rules of three. And it's not always necessarily being deceitful, but kind of a pattern that we remember. Threes and fives. Do you kind of try to take account for that when people are spouting off like rules of threes? Like we did this and this and this, and then this and this and this.
Well, any repetition is somewhat suspect, but it's what I talk about is just the number three. I call it the number three the liar's number. Okay. When deceptive people have to come up with a number, they will often choose a number that begins with three. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure why this is. And again, this is just not based on any scientific research, but just something that myself and other interviewers have seen over the years. And I think it's because perhaps when we were kids, a lot of fairy tales and nursery rhymes used the number three. Goldilocks, the three bears, and three little pigs. And so as an adult, when we have to come up with a number that we know is not true, three is a number that will often pop into our head. I left the house at 3 o'clock. I was robbed at $300. 3 men attacked me. So I just tell people, if you hear the number three, take a closer look at it, see if it is an accurate number. And if that's the only indication of deception, I would conclude it's a truthful statement. But you have the number three, other things that we look for in a statement, then it all starts to add up.
That makes sense. And now I'm sure you're challenged on veracity of some of this. And I am curious, for example, statement analysis in, let's say, a court setting. I know that a polygraph, for example, is not admissible in court.
Right.
What is statement analysis? You can testify as an expert witness, what you perceive, but is it actually something that can be used to charge somebody, or is it an investigative tool?
It's more of an investigative tool, just to let investigators know if they have the right suspect or to eliminate suspects. But yes, the majority of the techniques could be used in a courtroom, because it's not what I perceive. When we analyze a statement, we never interpret. It's just, what is the person saying? People mean exactly what they say. So when President Clinton, in talking about his grand jury testimony, said, I was bound to be truthful and I tried to be, well, the word tried tells us you weren't truthful. The word tried means I attempted. He should have said, and I was. But that's what happens. People's words will betray them. So a lot of techniques, the majority, are based on the English language. Mm-hmm. Now, the number three, no, that wouldn't fly in a courtroom, obviously. But when you talk about pronouns, we know that we is a plural pronoun. So somebody else was with them if they use the pronoun we. My is a possessive pronoun. Somebody says my victim. Well, they pretty much just confess. They just took ownership of that.
I guess so.
So that's what. So a lot of techniques could be used. I get asked to speak or testify as an expert witness, but I tell them, you don't need me. You don't need me to point out that tried means you didn't do it. Mm. You need me to be in a courtroom to show you what the witness is saying. And then as a prosecutor or defense attorney, you can then, challenge them on the stand with their language.
We're coming into a time of year that, do you go ballistic watching presidential debates, or do you just give up on them? Because from what I have seen, I would say 95% of the time they are lying or they're obfuscating, because a good example would be, I'm a moderator. I ask you a question. The answer would be, let me ask you a question. Or things like that. Is that not a fine example of dancing around the truth in every which way?
Oh, yes. A lot of times people will dance around the truth. Most people don't want to lie. And if you listen closely, they probably aren't lying, but they're doing just what you said. They'll dance around the truth. they'll use certain words or phrases that indicate they're skipping over something, things that they don't want to tell us about. And so that's what we got to listen closely. But yeah, I'm always got my DVD player going, recording the debates and stuff like that, because it's just, examples I can use in class then.
I was going to say, do you get called onto TV and, go over them sometimes, or do, I guess, reviews outside the class?
Every once in a while, and then a lot of investigators will contact me. If they've got a statement they want to take, are not sure if the person's being truthful or deceptive, they'll have me call me up and have me take a look at it.
Okay, well that's got to be good and handy. One of your recent ones that I think you were going to do, but you mentioned the link to all your analyses, but I didn't actually see it on the page, was Chris Cuomo. Which statement was that?
That's I have a famous cases page. He didn't make that page, but then I also have just in the news, just if somebody makes one statement, not a whole transcript, and that's where you'd find his statement, and that had to do with I think he was during his COVID time, he was visiting his new house he was building, and a bike rider came by and saw he wasn't wearing a mask, and Cuomo got in his face or something like that. But I forget. Well, I know what the bike rider I determined was being truthful. Everything he said happened. Cuomo was trying to downplay it a little bit there.
Okay, yeah, there were questions about Cuomo and whether he was even quarantining or not quarantining, if he had COVID or didn't have COVID. It was very interesting. I didn't know if that was what it was about, because he's been known to go off on other things too.
You're right.
I'm going to throw another one out there that I did not find on the page, but I know, for example, Lena Cisco, who I've had on before, and she's a huge admirer of yours and into statement analysis. Amanda Knox. Have you ever looked into Amanda Knox, and do you have any thoughts?
I haven't done any analysis of her case. I'm familiar with it somewhat. On the surface, it seemed a little hard to believe. She was being truthful, but no, I've not analyzed any of her statements.
Okay, I was hoping that you had, because she actually came up in the latest Malcolm Gladwell book as well. And the premise of that book, I believe it's Talking to Strangers, is that some people don't act appropriately as we'd expect them to act. And that leads into somebody getting killed by a cop, is the thesis that he opens with. And Amanda Knox is an example of it. And he was saying that she's, a lack of better words, just a kind of unpleasant personality. And that personality led to everything with her. So I didn't know if you happened to see it or not, because I'm speculating that you would say personality has little to do with statement analysis.
For the most part, you're right. I mean, we're just looking at how people phrase their statement. There's several ways you can phrase a statement. And so why did they say it this way versus another way? Okay. And so personality, not a whole lot. Now, if somebody suffered a traumatic event, they're traumatized, that's going to affect, maybe how they phrase their statement. Or if they have any type of mental deficiency, that's going to play a factor as well.
I want to actually go the other way on that, because as an interviewer, I sometimes interview people who are extremely intellectual or professorial even. And one of the things that I really appreciate is how you like to have people write things down, because they have stops and starts a lot. And if they have a pen, they cross things out, so it kind of flags what they're starting to say. Does some of that get mitigated when you're talking to a PhD, for example, or that type, who, if I could put it as nicely as possible, never comes out with a straightforward statement? They're always so careful and certain, trying to be certain about their language, that they tend to back up and then start over again. And it's actually quite excruciating to edit.
Well, it does, a person's background does play into it, or sometimes maybe cultural differences, even within the United States. But the bottom line is they may use a $100 word instead of a $10 word. But it's still going to be there, that deception. Now, some people are better liars than others. I say there's no such thing as a good liar. There's just bad listeners. If you listen closely, it'll be there. But some people don't give as many deceptive indicators. And so again, the longer the statement is, the longer the interview is, the more questions we can ask, the better feel we're going to get exactly, is this person being truthful or deceptive? What was going on.
Okay, do you use things like a timetable? I believe you do. Use percentages, right, in your book? Like how much time do they spend talking about what led up to the event, how much time they discuss the event itself, and how much time they talk about the aftermath?
Yeah, with a written statement, much easier to do with a written statement. If you're analyzing a written statement, as soon as they start to talk about the incident, you just draw a line on the paper. And then when the incident is over with, you draw another line. And then you look at those three segments, like you said, the before, during, and after. And what we find is that deceptive stories usually have a very short ending. If they're making up the story, they set the stage, they tell you what happened, but they don't have a significant ending. Whereas in real life, there's always something going on after the incident's over with. The police are called, people fill out forms, they take showers, they're comforted, and that shows up in their statement. So we look to see if it's a balanced statement. But the big key is usually deceptive stories have a very short ending.
Okay, and that leads into actually a phone call by Karina Rosario in the Faith Hedgepeth murder case.
Yes.
911 call. Now, in that, you had some problems with the call, if I recall. Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, we can. I mean, she started off her 911 call by saying hi, which is very improper greeting for a 911 call. I mean, usually it's just immediately tell the operator what's going on, what do you need. And then the other thing we look for in a 911 call is the plea for help. What is the caller asking for? And an innocent caller is usually asking for help for a victim. This is what happened, need an ambulance, something like that. A deceptive caller who maybe, killed the victim and then wants to make it sound like they found the body, sometimes will not ask for help. And that's what we had here. She just said, hi, I think I just walked in the door. And I don't think she said my roommate. She said my friend is unconscious.
Okay.
But doesn't, and there's, we expect if you're calling 911, you're looking for assistance, but she doesn't specifically ask for help or send an ambulance. And then later she'll tell us there's blood everywhere. So now in the initial call, I mean, she seems somewhat rather calm, and yet you got a bloody crime scene. So there's a lot going on there, even in that very first sentence. And then she used the word just, which to me is a unique word. I tell people to listen for the word just. It means a person most of the time is minimizing something. If you walk into a restaurant by yourself, what the hostess or hostess should say is how many's in your party, but 9 times out of 10, they're going to say just one. They're minimizing, how many's in your party. And so when she said, I just walked in the door, she's probably minimizing time, but is that an accurate statement? Did she just walk in the door, or is she minimizing her actions? Because I think later on it was determined that she had sent a text message like an hour before she called 911 saying that, Faith was dead.
Oh, wow.
And there was evidence that, she waited before she called 911. So maybe she didn't just, walk in the door.
Wow. That's creepy. Now, in a typical 911 call, because I haven't listened to a lot of them, would it be quite often that they be almost mid-conversation when the operator lands, like, I can't wake him up. He's not waking, that kind of thing? Would that be a typical call versus I got home at 6 and saw such and such happen, that the narrative is a problem?
Yeah, you expect the caller to be trying to help the victim out as much as they can. Now, again, people who react in traumatic situations, they react differently, but you expect them to have some sense of urgency. She was a little timid. The operator, I think, asked her, is she cold, wanted her to touch her. And, I think eventually she did do that, but she was a little hesitant to want her. I think she was half on the bed, half on the floor. So they wanted to put her maybe just on the floor, and she didn't want to move the body. But yeah, expect the caller to be participating, because that's why they're calling, to help this victim out. Is anything I can do before, paramedics arrive.
Okay, and you also mentioned just as a qualifier, and a distancing is often a case too, right? Like somebody would say, for example, let's say that somebody was beaten bloody, they'd say, I didn't touch them. And, kind of lessen whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, when they say that. I mean, that's a good statement. I didn't touch them. It's a good denial. It's just, if they just blurt that out, then that's suspicious. Why would you say that at that
Okay.
point in time? If they were asked, "Did you touch them?" then that would be a good answer to a question like that.
Okay, I'm always curious though on distancing terms and things like we'll go back to Clinton, like that woman, because of course he didn't know who she was. Now, are there other times where it would actually make sense and still not necessarily be a bad thing? Like if I don't know how to explain, but if sometimes if people are in a conflict, like in a office with a psychiatrist, it'd be like that woman, da 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 da, or that man will never pick up his stuff. Are there times that it doesn't mean that much?
Well, there are times, but we recognize that yes, the word that indicates distance. The word this indicates closeness.
Okay.
And so what happens is sometimes people will use the word this when they probably should use the word that, or not even use it. Like, this man attacked me. Well,
right.
The word this indicates specificity, but why also show closeness versus a man attacked me. And so, in the case of Clinton, we expect him to create some distance between him and Monica Lewinsky. So he, like you said, he referred to her as that woman. He could have just said Miss Lewinsky, but he also said that and included the word woman to create some distance there. He used the word with as well, which also, the word with in any statement always shows distance within the statement. You see something before the word, you see something after the word, and the word with separates them.
Okay. And I think you've mentioned too, like terms like we, using the term we can sort of imply that the victim may not be a victim. They may in fact be involved.
Yeah. I mean, everybody knows the pronoun we and us indicates plurality. Mm-hmm. And so you want to know who all was involved. But what people don't realize is that the word we and us always indicates a partnership. It doesn't mean they were best of friends. It could be a very limited partnership. But the word we always indicates that two people collaborate together to do something. So the question is, should there be a partnership? And probably 9 times out of 10, yes. We went to the game, we did this. But there's some situations, such as a sexual assault case or a kidnapping case, we do not expect the victim to use the pronoun we. We went into the house and he assaulted me. No, it should be he forced me, he dragged me into the house. A real victim's not going to use the pronoun we or us. And so we look to see, we recognize the pronouns there. We look to see, is it justifiable use to use that pronoun? And again, most situations, the answer is yes, but there are some situations, no.
Okay, I had a question actually from one of the viewers specifically for you, but what is the most revealing statement you regularly hear and smile to yourself because you know the person is saying one thing yet means another? With an example.
Probably the most common one, I would say, especially when you're talking about politicians or just watching people on TV, is the person will answer the question. They'll give an answer, but they won't answer the specific question. And a lot of times this goes unnoticed by, usually it's journalists that are interviewing somebody. And they'll ask a question, the person will give an answer, but they don't answer that specific question. You may recall back in 2011, New York City Congressman Anthony Weiner said his Twitter account was hacked and sexually explicit photos were being sent to a young lady. And he was doing his best to deny he sent those photos of himself.
Sure.
Terrible analysis, terrible interviews by journalists. But at one point, Wolf Blitzer interviewed him and said, this is the picture. I'm sure you've seen it by now. Is this you? So that's the question he asked him. Is this you? And Anthony Weiner gave a very long answer. Photos can be manipulated. We're going to get to the bottom of this. But he never said no. He never answered that specific question. And Wolf Blitzer, let him get away with not answering the question. So that's probably the most common one I see a lot.
Interesting. Where would this one fall? And it just popped in my head, but I don't know if you remember Megyn Kelly asking Donald Trump that question about essentially you've called women dogs and blah, blah, a lot of other things. And he just looked up at her and he said, only Rosie O'Donnell.
I don't know if she asked the question, though. She may have just made a comment like that. And so he wasn't avoiding the question necessarily. I don't remember the exact her statement or question what it was. I do remember that answer though that you said, but But still, you're right. He's kind of playing it off, as you mentioned earlier, trying to dance around it by kind of joking, saying it's Rosie O'Donnell, hoping that would end that series of that line of questioning.
Okay, I only brought it up because that actually was new to me. I had never seen somebody essentially do like a judo move like that. I mean, he answered it with a joke, with humor.
Right.
And is that something that you've run into over time, that somebody is quick on their feet?
Yeah, some people, like I said, are better liars than others, or being deceptive. More people are quick on their feet. In an interview setting, if somebody made a joke like that, okay, but I would ask the question again.
Okay.
I'd get them to answer that question or explore their answer a little bit more. But
okay, have you ever gotten it wrong? I mean, has there ever been a case that you've felt one way, but then as you discovered over time that you actually were wrong?
not to my knowledge, but now, in fairness, I don't want to take all the credit for it, is investigators will ask for my help. And the agreement is, I'll help you, but I'd like for you to get back to me with an update to see if I was helpful. Did this person do it or not? And probably only about half the time do they do that. I'll sometimes try to contact them. So there may be times where I said this person did or didn't do it, and then I never heard what the outcome was. But most of the time when people do get back to me, yeah, there is an update. It's usually, yeah, he wasn't the guy or he was the guy.
Well, cool. Since you're on top, then how about, is there a case out there you know of that frustrates you, that you feel like everybody has gotten it wrong?
Well, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is the O.J. Simpson case. I mean, he did it. There's no doubt about it. But yet, he's found not guilty. I mean, that was really the prosecution, I think, kind of blew that case. It wasn't so much the dream team, and you obviously had good defense lawyers, but the prosecution could have done a better job in presenting that case to the jury. But that's the one that first thing that comes to mind is he showed a lot of deceptive indicators. Even just common sense would tell you that. But then for him to get off was a shame.
Okay. Is there any other cases? Let me see. Casey Anthony. Do you feel like justice was served on that one?
Now, that would be one. No, I don't think justice was served. And yes, that one does bother me because, again, she showed a lot of deceptive indicators, contradicted her own attorney. She said that her mother called 911 like 31 days later when she couldn't, where's my granddaughter been? Mm-hmm. So then Casey was there. So Casey got on the phone with the operator, 911 operator. And Casey told the 911 operator, I actually talked to my daughter today. She said, I actually just talked to her. So she wants us to believe that 31 days later, she just talked to her daughter on the phone. Now, her defense attorney said that Kaylee drowned in the family swimming pool during opening statements. Offered no evidence for that, but that's what he told the jury during opening statements. So she drowned in the family swimming pool. How she talked to her daughter 31 days later. And what she did was she told the operator, what she said was, I actually received a phone call today. But she used the word actually.
Oh, yeah.
The word actually always means a person's making a comparison in their mind. And we don't know what she was comparing, but the first thing we go is the opposite. If she said she received a phone call, she probably didn't receive a phone call. And that's what I think was the case here. She knows she didn't receive a phone call. She wants to tell the operator she did, so she unknowingly used the word actually. She should have just said, I received a phone call today. But again, that's not what she said. She said, I actually received a phone call.
That's interesting. So actually is one of those words like but. Like anytime somebody says a sentence, but, everything before the but is irrelevant.
Right. It's been said that but stands for behold the underlying truth. So just like you said, everything before it, disregard it. Now, this is what you need to listen to.
Can we go over a few of those? Because I think those are fun and maybe help trigger us out. I know there's actually, like you mentioned, I think, what is it? The other big swearing on it, like I swear to God or honestly or.
Yeah, there's certain words or phrases that indicate untruthfulness. And as you mentioned, like anytime people mention God, that red flag should go up. I swear to God, honest to God, or I swear my mother's grave, to be honest, frankly, really. Those are words that indicate untruthfulness, not an absolute. I tell people about 50% of the time. Some people have a habit of using those phrases. Some people, if they're being interviewed by law enforcement, may just assume you're not going to believe me, so I have to use those phrases to convince you of it. But if you hear it, definitely you should ask a few more questions about it, because a lot of investigators will testify to that, yeah, I was interviewing a guy, and as soon as he said, I swear to God, it turns out he was, being deceptive.
Okay. And I imagine, and this is where I find statement analysis just fascinating. And I would watch things, and in your book, you talked about how movies will be ruined for you and television shows. I didn't realize it, but I would almost always get what was going to happen. I mean, almost without fail, in the sense that, and it would be somebody would say something, and I would just make a smart ass comment like, yeah, you didn't do it at 5 because you were too busy locking the car to kill him over here. or what, I don't know what it is, but I would always fill in like a second sentence or what I thought was an incomplete thought that would do it, and it would just pop in my head. So I'm wondering if I intuitively was doing statement analysis.
Probably. And that's what I tell people, that, I'll show statements, or maybe 2 statements, and which one's true, which one's false. And as a group, they can usually get it right every time, which one's being deceptive. But they may not know why it's deceptive. It just sounds like it. And then with statement analysis, it helps you put your finger on it. Because of this certain word or certain phrase, that's why we know they're being deceptive. And so, yeah, you can watch, as you mentioned, a fictional movie, and even though they're actors, the writers know which actor's going to lie and which is going to tell the truth. And have the ones that are going to lie just like real people do in real life, and use that same type of language. They may not answer the specific question. They may answer a question with a question or something like that.
So that's actually good writing then, I would think.
It's good writing, but they're thinking like a liar, so they just say it like a liar would.
Right. Well, I mean, at least it's real. I mean, there's nothing worse than, oh no, it's the evil twin that we never saw. That's kind of irritating. Now, on that, I'm leading into it. I kind of am interested in language. Is that what attracted you to this? And I bring it up because I've had like Jim Fitzgerald on it, and he was instrumental with catching the Unabomber. And what was fascinating about him was his English was perfect. And his manifesto caught him because he had a superior use of language than anybody else in the country, probably. And what tripped him up was, there's a saying, you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Right.
But he said, you can't eat your cake and have it too.
Right.
What's interesting about that is everybody's like, oh, that's weird. And he wrote a letter at another point that had that same phrase in it. But the irony is that his use of the phrase is more correct. That was the original usage of it. So is that, in essence, some of what you're doing is parsing language and words?
You're definitely parsing, language and words. You got to listen closely, to what people are saying. As I mentioned, there's several ways you can phrase a statement. So, why did he say it this way versus another way? And again, some people, if they're more educated, may use more proper grammar versus somebody on the street using street language or something like that. But it's still there. We still have, words, have a definition. They mean something. We have the rules of grammar we have to abide by. And so when people start violating the rules of grammar, is it because of poor grammar skills, or is it because they're being deceptive? And so that's what we're still, definitely, as you mentioned, we're parsing their words and listening very closely to what they're saying.
Okay, because I think you've brought up in the book and other times that somebody would say, my car, my Ford Fairlane, my car, the car, depending on where it was, and that can be an indicator.
Yes, I mean, my car, absolutely, they're taking possession of it. Mine's a possessive pronoun. When they call it the car, they're no longer taking possession of it. And so we look to see, well, why did the language change? changing language indicates deception unless there's a justification for that change. And so I've seen, statements where I'm driving my car and somebody jumped in it, maybe a carjacker, and now they call it the car. Well, that's probably because they got this knucklehead in this car with them that they don't want them there. It's still their car, but now they call it the car because it's been damaged somewhat. Or you'll see that traffic accident. It's my car, and then once it gets damaged, now it's the car because, they no longer take possession of it because it's been damaged. And so that's acceptable. But then other times we see it's an indication of deception when they start calling it the car because they're no longer taking possession of it or any other item that may refer to.
That makes sense. When I had a car broken into, I felt like it was violated, and I was immediately distancing. So yeah,
it's a natural thing. Yeah.
Is that, and I believe that was instrumental with Susan Smith?
Yeah, in her confession now, what she talked about was she was gonna, in her written confession to the sheriff, she said she was contemplating suicide, drown all three of them. And so she said something to the effect, I got into my car and started to go down the ramp, and I stopped and started to go again and stopped. And then she said, I got out of the car and stood by the car, nervous wreck. So it went from my car to the car. So why did the language change? Now, in my mind, it tells me that she knew what she was going to do. She knew she could see that car going down the ramp into the water, her two boys trapped in it. And so naturally, you wouldn't want to take possession of that car. And so I think it indicated that she knew what she was going to do, that, this idea of drowning all three of them, suicide, probably really wasn't on the table. I think her current boyfriend didn't want to have kids, and that contributed to her drowning her own two boys. So even in her confession, she's being a bit deceptive.
Okay, well, perfect. And while we're talking about possessions, you have a couple books out there. I Know You're Lying and Don't Be Deceived. And I Know You Were Lying is an audio, and that's how I was able to read it. And I always want to thank authors for putting their books in audio because it makes it more accessible for the rest of us who have a day job or have to drive or, try to get whatever we can in when we can. Now, do you have any kind of training or anything available to make me and others smarter at this?
I do have some on-demand training. It's equivalent to my one-day seminars. It's about 8 hours of training. You can log on anytime you want. Take the training at your own pace. There are some some statements to analyze. Compare your analysis with a completed one to see how well you're doing. There's some short quizzes. I mean, it's an open book test. Everybody passes it, but there are some quizzes to make sure you understand the techniques taught in that lesson. And then the final test statement, I have them send me their analysis, use an online form. I analyze it and give them some feedback on how well they're doing.
Oh, awesome. Now, I also have what is a live stream where I'll bring on guests again, and I allow the audience to ask questions directly in the chat. And I was wondering if you might be available for that in the future or be open to that.
Yes, I would be open to that.
Fantastic. Hopefully I can get that scheduled. I think it'd be a lot of fun, and maybe bring you on with Lena or something like that, because it's fun getting more than one person on that and getting deep in discussion. Now, everybody can find everything about your courses at statementanalysis.com.
That's correct.
Well, perfect. Mark, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Eric, thank you for having me on.